Hello, everyone. So let me show you a site that you may already know about, but if you haven't, it's pretty neat. It's called Airbnb. What Airbnb is, it's a site where people can advertise either like rooms in your house, or if you have an extra apartment that you want to lend out. But it's not a rental site. People are not going to live there long term. It's a site for like visitors and tourists. So if you're going to a new city and you want to look for a place to stay and you don't want to spend a lot of money on a hotel, you can go to this site as an alternative. So these are like rooms in private homes or apartments that people have that they're willing to lend out to short-term visitors, so tourists and people are going to stay a short time. And it's kind of neat. The rates are, depending on where you look, the rates can be a lot more competitive than for a hotel, a big chain hotel. But one of the neat things about this site is on the right here, when you do a search and you look in an area to find places that you can stay, on the right here you see a map and where all those places are listed. Now, if you look at that map, it looks kind of familiar, especially if you've used Google Maps before, because in fact, that is a Google map. The map on the right is not something that the engineers at Airbnb they just built on their own. They're actually just using Google Maps, the features on Google Maps, and they're just pulling it into their site, which saves them a lot of time and effort and money, in fact, to pay the developers to do that. So that feature of being able to pull in something like Google Maps from outside and just incorporating it into your site or your app is actually a very common thing. You might think, oh, well, Google, that's a private company. Why would they want to open their stuff up? They want to keep it locked down pretty tight. But that's actually not the case. If you think about it, uh, letting other people use their stuff in their apps and sites, because first of all, you got to cite it. If you use Google Maps, you got to put a citation, or you got to put a reference to that, and it's not just something you made up yourself. But by doing that, they get their name out there. And so for them, it's kind of like free advertisement. Okay, but in any case, that feature of doing that, that's called an application program interface, or API for short. So you'll hear that acronym kind of thrown about all over the place, API. So an API is basically it provides you a way as an individual developer, a programmer, to connect to an offsite database that somebody else has set up and use that data in your app or your site. It could be as small as another single developer just kind of putting their own information out there for free, or it could be something as big as Google or Facebook or Twitter. The big tech companies, they all have APIs that individual developers can tap into and use their data, either for free in a lot of cases. You might have to sign up or register and get a special code in some cases, or in some cases they do charge a pretty small fee, but it's not a hefty fee, because again, it's to their advantage to get people to use their stuff, because that really gets their name out there, and it's like free advertising, like I said. Okay, so in this set of modules, what I want to do is show you examples of how to use these APIs. If you wanted to incorporate a map into your app, for example, how would you do that? Or if you found a database that somebody has made available and you want to use that data, how would you do that? Okay, well, the neat thing about it is it's not that hard, but the other side of it that you do have to be aware of is that because there's no standardized way of doing it, um, each time you use a different API, you have to be real flexible, and you have to be, there's a whole bunch of trial and error involved, I have to say, because the way that they send data, or the way that you connect to the API and the way that they send data to you, is different every time. It's not standardized. And so you kind of have to be willing to do a little tweaking and playing around with stuff. It's not going to work exactly right the first time. You got to do some trial and error. And that's just part of the game. That's kind of what makes this fun. And so it's something that you can't just program a computer and artificial intelligence to, okay, well, just connect to this thing and get this data. It's something as a human that you have to, use your ingenuity and problem solving to be able to figure out. Okay, so now, for example, let me just show you this other tab here. So here's, the Google Maps API, and they got you can see it's a pretty nice, as you would expect from Google, it's a pretty nice put together thing. So it's pretty extensive, and a lot of sites use Google Maps. Whenever you're using an app or a site and you see something that looks like Google Maps, chances are it is Google Maps. They're just using the API. Um, so in this module, I'm going to, again, like I said, I'm going to show you an example of how to connect to a simple API. If you wanted to use something like Google Maps, you'd have to do some reading of documentation. It's not just something where you can just, oh, let's just start writing code and see what happens. You gotta be willing to, read through some documentation, look at some examples, and like I said, you got to be also willing to play around and tweak stuff. You got to be flexible because it's definitely not going to work right the first time. You got to do there's some trial and error involved. Okay, but if it's something that you want to do and it's a neat thing, then let's go ahead and take a look at how you do that.